So this is part 2 of our Watercolor for Beginners series, and in this video it's going to be all about color mixing and some color theory. Now part 1 was all about what supplies to start with, so we went over paper, brushes, what paints to pick for your palette for a beginner. We went over how to swatch them out and how to test out your brushes and just start playing around with your paints. In today's video I'm going to talk about the best mixes with your colors to get the most vibrant versions of them, why not to mix certain colors. We're going to talk about how to mix browns, grays, and black if you don't want to have a specific black in your palette. We're going to go over some complementary color mixing and how to darken colors. And then you can just sort of take this information and go ahead and play with it. Now, I do encourage you to follow along because you do learn best following along. And like I said in the previous video, every brand is going to be slightly different with their mixes, but we're just going to jump in here. Now, this is how I set up my palette. So I've got my cool yellow, warm yellow. Now, just to make it easy, I left one space out. So I just cut this in half. And I have 8 spaces on this side, 8 spaces on this side. So I cut it in half like this, and then either way, just to make it super easy. But I'm going to show you what mixing both of these colors look like as well. So for the yellows, I'm just going to put that up here. But the reason I have them spaced out like this, because mixing colors that are closest together is always going to give you a better mix than if I were to mix these two. So I will explain that as we go, but we're just going to go ahead and just start mixing these colors, and then we'll get into everything else. So I want to start with my warm yellow, and we're going to go warm yellow, yellow orange, orange, and orange red. So we want to grab our warm yellow here, whatever warm yellow that you're using. And I'm just going to start getting this onto my palette. And then I want to go in with my warm red specifically. So you can clean your brush off or you can just dip right into it. Now, when you're color mixing, you always want to start with the lightest color and then add in the darker color, because it's a lot easier to go from light to dark than it is to lighten a dark color. So keep that in mind. And you always want to start, a little bit at a time. So grab a little bit of your warm red and just start mixing that in. And that makes a pretty nice light red color, maybe a tiny bit more because I'm looking for like a little bit of a peachy color, sort of like that. So we don't want it to be true orange yet, but just play with your mix and see what you get. And now I'm going to be, not too careful filling in these areas. Now, if you're using just the 3 primary colors, some of your mixes might not come out as vibrant, so be aware of that. Because as I said before, if we mix colors that are further away from each other, they're going to mute each other down a little bit, which can be great if you want that. So I'm picking up a little bit more warm red and just starting to mix this in. And I want to mix like a nice orange color now. And that's a pretty nice orange color. Add a little bit of water if you need some more flow. And we can even get it just slightly darker even. So I'm going back in with a little bit of that warm yellow, a little bit more warm red, just to saturate the color. And what that means is I just want it to be darker and more vibrant. So I just did the same mix, and then we're just going to get this color down here. Now, depending what paper you're using, your paper might dry a little less quick than mine does. So just be careful when you're going up against the colors. You can leave a little gap. But this paper dries pretty quickly. This is the Etcher cold pressed paper, and I really like it. So now I want to make a red orange. So I just need to add a little bit more red into this mix. And that's pretty good there. Maybe a tiny little bit more, and I might want to add just a little bit water to this. Now I want to make sure I don't have too much red. Maybe even just a little bit more. And this is all I do when I'm color mixing. I just play it down, do a little dab. Do I like that? Do I need a little bit more red, a little bit more yellow? And I just play with it like that. Now this might be the boring part for some of you guys, so if you just want to get into the other stuff, you can certainly skip ahead. But this is important to know as well, especially when you're first starting out. Okay, so there's our 3 colors. So we've got a yellow, an orange, and a red orange. I'm gonna go ahead and rinse that off. Now I wanna mix my 2 primary colors that I'm using. So I've got a warm red here and a cool red, and I'm looking for some sort of an alizarin crimson color. Now I explained in the last video why I don't have alizarin crimson in my palette here. So you can go ahead and watch that. But I'm gonna grab that warm red. And then I wanna grab my cool red and just start mixing this in and seeing what kind of a color I can get. And then again, I will dab it on and see how this looks. And that's pretty good. That's pretty close to what the color I'm looking for is. Now, because I'm using the Cotman watercolors, they're not as vibrant or saturated as some other brands. So be aware of that, but this is pretty close to an alizarin crimson. So if I just take my swatch sheet here and I show you my alizarin crimson, that's pretty darn close. So that's pretty cool that we can take these 2 colors and make that color with it. Now, as I've said before, alizarin crimson in a lot of brands is not permanent, so it's not light fast. However, these 2 colors are. So that's why I tend to use them instead. Okay, so now I want to work on mixing some purples. So again, I want to take the cool red with the warm blue. And why I want to use these 2 colors and not this one is because this already has some blue and some red in it because it's more to the cool side. So it leans more towards blue. This one already has some red in it because it leans a little bit more warm. So they're going to make better purples. Now, if I choose the cool blue, this one has some yellow in it. So now we're mixing red, blue, and yellow, which is going to give us more of a muted color or a brown. So doing a sort of swatch sheet like this is good, but you could always have, you know, your color wheel to look like that. But when you're first looking and learning, it's sort of better to see it and do it yourself. So I want to grab my cool red, which is this pink color. I'm just going to put this over here, and I want to grab my warm red, but I want to make more of like a pinky reddy version of it, and then a really nice dark violet. So I want to be careful with the amount of the ultramarine or whatever warm blue that you're using. So I want to have this really nice like mauve color. So I'm just picking up a little bit of it. And then I quite like that. So I'm going to grab just a little bit more water and fill this in. So this color wheel that we're doing now will give us the best version of every color. And so that's really nice because you don't have to worry about mixing colors that aren't going to mix well. So that's why I chose to lay out everything this way. Now, if I want a little bit more darker version, I just need to add more warm blue. And I'm looking for sort of a dioxazine violet color. So I just want to add a little bit at a time. And that's pretty darn close there, maybe just a smidge more. And that's the color that I'm looking for. Maybe just add a little bit of water to get a little bit of flow. Now, if you're using the professional brand, your colors are going to be a lot more vibrant. But as you can see, you can still get good colors even with the Cotman brand. There we go. So that's a nice purple. So again, if we come over and just look at the dioxazine violet. Of course, this is going to be a little bit more darker and pure because it's the pure color. So if you want an easy mixing violet, then you can always add in your dioxazine violet. Now that's a color that I do use a lot, so that's why I tend to keep it in my palette. But you can see you can get something pretty darn close. Now we want to make a blue because sometimes in your palette you don't want such a cool blue or such a warm blue. Sometimes you want something a little more in between, like if you're looking for like a phthalo blue. So let's see what we can do if we mix our two primary blues together, just like we were looking for sort of that alizarin crimson color. So I'm going to take the cool blue because that's sort of the more lighter version of these two colors. And I've just put little pieces of washi tape here just so I make sure I grab the right colors. And then I'm going to go in with my ultramarine or whatever warm blue that you're using. And I just want to start mixing in just a little bit at a time because I don't want to overpower the mix. And I want to get something that's sort of in between those two colors. And I feel like that's pretty close. So I'm going to try it out. And I think I like that. Maybe just a hint, ever so slightly more of the ultramarine. And if you want it to lean a little bit more warm, you just add a little bit more ultramarine. If you want it to lean a little bit more cool, you just add a little bit more of your cool blue. Now that's pretty good. If we look at this now, it's obviously not going to be as intense as this because this is the pure color, but at least we can get something close to in between there. So now I want to make some greens. So this cool blue is always going to make better greens with the cool yellow because again, you've got blue or green and yellow in here and blue and yellow or blue and green in this mix. So that's why they're always going to mix better greens. So let's go ahead and grab our cool blue. And I showed you in the last video as well how to tell if your colors are cool or warm. So you can always go ahead and check that video out. That was the part 1 video. So now I want to get a little bit of yellow going. So because I'm looking to get a blue-green where it leans a little bit more blue, I need more blue in my mix. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of yellow. And you can see how just a tiny little bit really affects the mix. And if I want it to be more saturated, so a little bit brighter, I'm just going to add a little bit more paint. And then I'm going to grab, again, just a little bit of that yellow. Just enough to get that color that I'm going for. So a nice like teal green color. And look at how pretty that is. So now I want a little bit of a darker green. So I'm looking more towards Hooker's green, but it's going to be pretty hard to mix a Hooker's green. So this is sort of like an in-between green. Sort of right in the middle of between cool and really warm. So I'm going to get this down. And now I'm looking to get more of like a sap green. So again, I just need to add a little bit more yellow into the mix. And this is sort of the same thing we did with the yellows and the reds. We just kept adding a little bit more red. And I really want this to be bright. And there we go. So that's pretty darn close to a sap green. So that's just how to make your basic colors within the color wheel. And now we're gonna go ahead and start mixing some other colors. Okay, so now we're gonna get into mixing some browns. And I've gone ahead and cleaned off my palette because I find, especially with beginners, if you keep a lot of paint on your palette, you're more likely to grab some of that paint when you don't mean to, and then you can sort of start muddying up your mixes. Now, as you get more used to mixing with your colors, it's nice to leave some of those colors there as you're working on your piece, because you might want to grab a little bit of a color that you've already used or that you've already laid down, because you know that's going to mute another color. But when you're just starting out, it's nice to sort of keep wiping your palette off so you have a fresh start. So let's get into mixing some browns. Now, this is why I highly recommend using burnt sienna in your palette. So we're going to go ahead and grab our burnt sienna. And I want to get a good mix of this, and I'm going to add a little bit of water because I need this to flow. So you can see this is a really nice warm brown. So it's got some red in it. It's like an orangey warm red brown. Let's just put this down. Now, if we want to start darkening this up and getting some darker versions of this, we're going to use our warm blue. So I'm just going to go right in with the warm blue and just start mixing this in. And as you can see, just starting to mix it in, we're already getting sort of like a light walnut or light sepia color. So we can just start mixing a little bit more and a little bit more to give us some darker versions of it. And I'm just adding a little bit of water when I need a little bit more flow. So we're just going to keep going. And now you can see this is pretty darn close to that sepia. Maybe this is a little bit closer because I feel like this sepia leans a little bit warm, but you can see you can still get some pretty dark versions of it. So all I'm doing is just adding my warm blue to this. And this is probably as dark of a brown as we're going to get out of this mix. So you can see you can get a little bit of variety of browns in there just by adding your burnt sienna. Super easy to do, right? So now what if we want to go into mixing some neutral tints? So where we've got our convenient neutral tint here, we can keep mixing these two colors together to get some neutral tint versions. So again, I'm going to add just a little bit more water. I'm just using that warm brown. And I'm just going to keep going in. And I would say probably here's a good version of it. And I'm just going to push my water out of the way for right now. And look at that. That's a really nice gray color. So that's pretty good. I feel like this is still a little bit on the warmer side. So you can just keep adding a little bit of your warm blue. And we'll get a little bit more of a cooler version, just like that. So that's pretty cool that we can use just these two colors to get all these variations of colors, right? Super easy. So that's why I really suggest getting the burnt sienna with that. Now, let's say we want to go ahead and mix some blacks. So I'm going to get black down here. Now we've already got this neutral tint mixed up, so we're going to go ahead and keep that. But what I want to do is add some sepia to it. Now you could go ahead and start mixing some colors again, but sometimes it's really hard to get a really concentrated sepia mixture. So that's why I find it really convenient just to have the sepia color there. So I'm just going to go in with sepia, grab some of this and add it to my neutral tint mix. Now you could just use these two colors on their own if you like. And I feel like I need to add just a little bit more of those colors back because that sepia sort of overpowered it. And that's a pretty dark color there, but that's probably about as dark as we're going to get using this version. Now, what if we were to just use the sepia and the neutral tint? So let's try that, because these are two very dark and opaque colors on their own. So they're going to give us an even better version. So I'm just grabbing some concentrated sepia, and then I'm going to go in with that neutral tint. And because we need a lot of pigment, you want to go in pretty concentrated. And that's a pretty darn good black there. Look at that. Okay, so that's just using the sepia and the neutral tint. And I'm going to go ahead and just swatch out the black for you. So this is a lamp black from the Winsor & Newton. So remember, the neutral tint I have is the professional neutral tint. And this is just the lamp black from Winsor & Newton Cotman. So look at that. We did a pretty good version. But now here's the fun part. So if we were to start pulling this out, and let's say we want it to make a little bit of a gradient, we'll still get a little bit of color variation in here. So whereas if we start pulling out this black, it sort of gets a little flat and just dull. So that's why I tend not to use just black on its own, but you can also mix colors into black. So if you want it a little bit more warmer, you could add some red into it. You could mix some dioxazine violet into it. You can really have some fun, but this just gives you a basic way to mix those colors, and we've only really used 3 colors. 2 other colors at the bare minimum. So that's pretty cool, right? Now, quickly, I just want to show you how to mix the cool yellow and the warm yellow together to sort of get a neutral yellow. Now, I did forget to do this earlier, but I need to clean my yellows off if I want a pure mixture, because I've got some green mixed in there, and I've got some red mixed into my warm yellow. So I just take them in the water and just rinse them off. So I'm going to start with the cool yellow because that's more light than the other yellow. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of the warm yellow and just start mixing that in. And I want to get sort of an in-between color. Now this is going to be a little hard to see just because these colors are already so light on their own. But you can see you can get sort of something in between. Maybe add just a touch more of that. And that's sort of a little bit more of a neutral yellow there. Okay, so now I just want to go over some complementary mixes and why you should use them and why you shouldn't and what they're good for. Now, complementary colors are colors that are across the color wheel. So red and green, blue and orange, and purple and yellow. And of course, the secondary colors like blue violet and yellow orange count as complementary colors as well. So just keep that in mind. Now, this is one of my favorite things to do with my greens. And what I've done here is I've taken out my Winsor & Newton Professional watercolors. And the only reason I grabbed these is because they're a little bit more vibrant, and it's going to be easier to tell what the difference is versus if I were to use the Cotman, because they're all just a little bit less vibrant. So the difference isn't going to be as noticeable. But one thing I want to show you is the difference between the greens in the Cotman and the greens in the Professional. So the greens in the Cotman are already a little bit more like earthy. So they're a little more usable on their own. Whereas the greens in the Professional I find are quite bright and vibrant. So depending what colors you're using, if you've noticed you've mixed a really vibrant green and it just looks way off, it doesn't look good in your landscape, this is going to be one of the ways to fix that. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab my Hooker's green here. And this is in the corner. And I want to get a pretty good mix of this going. And so that's what it looks like. So that's pretty, it's a bright green. So let's put that down here as our first. So that's a pretty bright green. So what I'm going to start doing is adding some red into that. Now, if we look across, I want to add more of a warm red into this. If I add a cool red, it's going to work a little bit, but not as well. So I'm going to grab some of my warm red here, which is this one. And the red is quite overpowering compared to the green. So you want to start with a little bit at a time. And what I'm doing here is just looking to darken this up. Now, as you can see, this is already starting to get a little bit darker, a little bit more earthy. That's probably more of like a true hooker's green, maybe a little bit more muted, but let's go ahead and grab a little bit more red in there. And bam, that's a very nice dark earthy green. And again, I'm just going to add a little bit more. That's a very nice dark green as well. So now we're getting like evergreeny, like a very nice foresty green. Very pretty. Let's add a little bit more. That kind of went a little bit more muted, a little bit more of a muted green. Okay. Let's add a little bit more. Okay, well now we're starting to get a little bit more of a brown, like a muddy green. That's weird, right? You would think that's weird. Let's add even more. And now look at this, we're getting sort of like a reddish, mucky color. Okay? And that's what complementary colors are going to do. They're going to bring the vibrancy down. They're going to desaturate it, darken it a little bit. But then at some point, you're going to start getting some muddy colors. So that's where you want to be very careful. So let's actually go and just grab some of this red here. I'm just grabbing the pure red. And this is why a lot of my colors end up being very dirty, because I will grab complementary colors like this and use them for this exact purpose, just to mute down a color, make it a little bit more darker, evergreeny if I need to. But this is a really great way to do that. So that's the red that we added into that. So now let's look at yellow and purple. So I'm going to go ahead and use my Winsor yellow, which would be my cool yellow. You could do this with the warm yellow too. And it just depends, you know, play around with both colors because it sort of depends what look you're going for. So now this purple is, again, very overpowering. So we want to just grab a little bit at a time and add that in. And actually we'll do just the Winsor yellow, get that down. Then we'll start adding some of the purple in. Now you can see that sort of changed the shade a little bit, made it a little bit off. A little bit more. Oh, we're sort of getting like a yellow, dirty yellow ochre color. A little bit more. Now if you use your warm yellow, you're just going to get a little bit more warm versions of this. But we're starting to get maybe a brown. Gonna add just a little bit more. Okay, well that's kind of a nice brown, isn't it? So we had to add quite a bit of that purple into there, but now we're getting somewhere nice. So let's add a little bit more, because if a little bit's good, a lot's gotta be great, right? Okay, so that's a nice brown. So if I want a darker brown, I'm going to add more. And yes, we're getting a nice warm brown there. So let's add even more. And now we're sort of getting a little more out of the brown range into a more muddy color. So, well, maybe if I add more, it'll fix it. And now I'm just getting sort of a purpley brown muddy color. So let's go in and just grab our purple And this is the dioxazine violet that we use to get those colors. So as you can see, adding yellow and purple makes a few nice brown colors, but I feel like my burnt sienna and my warm blue does a better job. So it just depends what you're looking for. If you don't want to add your burnt sienna into your mix, this is a very, powerful color because it can do so many different mixes, as we can see here. But you can sort of get some kind of browns going with your yellow and your purple. So this is what complementary colors does. Now, did we get brown here? Maybe that could be considered brown, but I find the green and the red isn't as good as the yellow and the purple to get some browns. So now let's try it with the blue and the orange and just see what we can get out of that mix. So again, the orange is a less overpowering color than the blue, so we're going to start with that. I have transparent orange here. If you don't have orange, you can always mix that together with your yellow and your blue. All right, so we've got a nice, very vibrant blue. Now let's pick something. So we want very bright colors. So I've got this transparent orange. Let's try this Windsor blue, because maybe that will do something, because we've already played around with our cerulean blue and our French ultramarine blue, or in the Cotman version, it's just ultramarine. So let's try grabbing our Windsor blue here, and mine is the third one in. So again, I want to be very careful. Just grab, actually, I always forget to do the first color. So this is our transparent orange here. Okay, so let's start grabbing some of that blue, get that in. That kind of made like a rusty color. That's kind of cool. A little bit more of it. A nice like dark burnt orange. Okay, let's add a little bit more. Oh, that's starting to get like a nice rich color. Look at that. That's a nice rich brown color there. So let's add some more. Ooh, you might consider this like a walnut brown or a light sepia color. Okay, so I'm getting some different browns than we mixed up before. So let's keep going. Okay. We're just going to keep adding. Okay, that's getting like a darker, not so quite a neutral tint color, but close. Close, so let's add even more and see what that gives us. Sort of gives us a neutral tint color, but more on the brown side. So let's go ahead and just grab some of this blue here. And this was the blue that we used. So this is our Windsor blue. Now you can play around with different versions of blue, of course, but that was just the blue that I ended up grabbing. So look at that. We got, some orange, a little bit darker orange, burnt orange, some browns. And I would say maybe some of these are close to here. And then we got some nice rich colors, but again, nothing super neutral like the burnt sienna and the ultramarine gave us. So again, some other options. So this is what you would get between your orange and your blue. And again, different oranges and different blue mixes are going to be slightly different, but this is just something to play around with. Now, I just want to do a couple here between the yellow and the purple using my warm yellow, because depending if you're using warm or cool, you will get a little bit different results. So we'll grab our warm yellow here. You can already see that now this is New Gamboge, so it already leans a little bit more like very warm, very almost like ochre-y. So depending what kind of yellow you have, this is already going to make, some other brown colors. So we'll put that down. And actually, I'm going to go in and grab that new gamboge. And we'll get that color here. So you can see how this is already leaning a little bit more towards the brown side. So depending what warm yellow you're using, you might only have your, you know, cool yellow. So we're going to grab a little bit more of that and get that in there. And so you can see how we're already getting different kinds of browns just by using a different yellow, which is pretty cool. And we're still using the same purple, you know, that good old dioxazine violet. But we're already getting some different mixes. So just keep this in mind. And this is like the fun part. Once you know what colors sort of go together to mix what, you can just start, you know, playing around and having fun with them. So just by choosing a different yellow, we get such a different variety of color mixes than down here. This is a lot more cool, whereas this is a lot more warm browns. Now the orange and the blue sort of gives us a little bit of variety of both, but they're going to be on the darker end of the spectrum. So if you want to mix lighter colors, more ochre colors, then you want to maybe mix your yellows and purples together. If you want darker, more saturated versions, then you want to go with your orange and your blue. And again, the red and the green, I don't find they mix great browns or anything like that, but they're really great for neutralizing each other. So now that you know the basics of your complementary colors, this is sort of the time where you want to just start playing around with them and having fun. So we know if we take the green and we add a little bit of red to it, it will sort of mute it down. But let's say I don't want it to be muted. What if I just want like a darker version of green, like a nice dark color of green? So I'm going to take my Hooker's green here and let's just put it down here. So we'll get that color there. Now, what would darken this color up? So one of our darkest colors, if we're looking at this, we're either going to go for blues or the purple. So let's just have fun and try purple. So let's add a little bit of purple into this. And wow, look at that green. So that gave us a nice dark green. Let's add a little bit more. And we're getting an even darker version of that there. Now remember, at some point when you start adding these colors, it's going to start going the opposite. But we'll just keep adding and see what we're getting. So that's sort of like a kind of green. Add a little bit more purple. Now that's kind of getting more like neutral. That's interesting. Why would that go neutral? So let's go ahead and just add a little bit more. Maybe just a hint of green back into that. And that's giving us a pretty dark color there. Well, now this is sort of an unexpected mix. I just wanted to get a dark green, but now I've gone ahead and sort of got a version of neutral tint. So if we're looking at this, green sort of leans between yellow and blue, and violet sort of leans between blue and red. So if you think of it, mixing all three primaries is going to give us a black or very dark color. Now you could go a little bit more concentrated than this. You're going to get a version of black, but because the violet has some red in it and some blue, and the green has some yellow and some blue, then we're going to get a very dark color if we mix those two together. So that's kind of cool. Now this mix is always going to lean a little bit more on the cooler side because you've got double blues going on versus one red and one yellow, let's say. But sort of looking at it, and now you're going to be able to start breaking down colors and saying, well, what would happen if I add this and this? Well, this has a blue and a red. This has a yellow and a red. So it's always going to be a little bit more on the warmer side because there's two reds versus a blue and a yellow. But now you can start looking at colors and starting to break them down. And this is gonna help you be able to create colors. Now, I just wanna touch real quickly on how to darken some colors. So as you saw with complementary colors, you can always darken some colors like that as well, but sometimes you want to go ahead and use something like neutral tint. Now I'm going to show you why I would use neutral tint over lamp black or a black color to darken some colors. So we're just going to go ahead and pick a color here. So this is Permanent Rose. So this would be like my cool red in this palette. So I'm going to get that color down there. I'm going to get it on here, and I'm going to grab my clean water now, just because my other water is getting quite dirty. So that's my Permanent Rose. Now I'm going to grab from my neutral tint, and again, I just want a little bit at a time. And look at that. That sort of just made a new version of this color. So that's kind of cool. That definitely darkened it down. So could we use this as a shadow color? You certainly could. Right? So let's grab a little bit more. Well, that's interesting. This just sort of made like a mauvey color. Okay, so your neutral tint, one thing you're going to notice here is not completely muddying the colors down. It's making a darker version of those colors. So depending what color you're using, you're getting a darker version of it. So again, let's just keep adding. I want a really dark version of this. Now we're almost getting a really dark purple here. But again, it's never going to be as bright or as saturated as your dioxazine violet, but that's, you know, that's getting a really cool gradient here. So again, let's grab even more and add this in, and we're getting a really dark color here. So this was our neutral tint. So let's grab our neutral tint and just put this on the paper here. I'm going to grab just a little bit of water. And I've still got a little bit of purple in that, so let's go ahead and just try to grab just some of the neutral tint. So there. That's close. It's still got a little bit of purple in it, but look at the color variation that we just got in that. Now let's do the same thing with our black. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that Permanent Rose, and I want to get quite a good mix of it. I want enough down on the palette, so I've got quite a bit to mix with. So again, let's put that down there. So nice and vibrant. Let's grab a little bit of our lamp black, start mixing this in. Okay. Well, it's close, but not exactly. And you're going to notice as we go why it's not exactly the same, and especially as it starts drying. So we're getting a little bit darker, so it is darkening the color, but I hope you're noticing what's going on at the same time. Let's make sure we've got a lot of that color in there. It's almost the same. So we'll grab a little bit more black. Okay, a little bit more. So I'm just doing the same that I did with the neutral tint, just adding more and more. And we're getting darker and darker. But I feel like I'm not getting such a nice okay, and that's probably as dark as I'm going to get. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab the black here if I can. There's probably still a little bit of that Permanent Rose in there, and put that down. Now I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, and then come back once it's dried and just let you know the difference. Okay, so I went ahead and did the exact same mix with the Cotman Lamp Black with the Permanent Rose still. So I just wanted to show you the difference between these two. So this was neutral tint, the Professional Lamp Black, and then the Cotman Lamp Black. Now, as you can see, the Cotman Lamp Black and the neutral tint seem to be the darkest. So you would think those would make the muddiest colors. And as we can see here with the Lamp Black from Cotman's, it has. So if you notice from each one, it'll be a little bit less saturated. So these are pretty saturated, pretty bright still, just getting darker versions. Now you could do even more versions in between, but this is sort of just to give you an idea. Now looking at the professional lamp black, you can see these just are a little bit more muted, less saturated, so they're not as vibrant of mixes than with the neutral tint. And especially with the Cotman, it sort of starts dirtying up that color quite quickly. And the reason for that is if we look at the mixes of these, so the Winsor Newton Cotman Lamp Black is only one pigment. So this is pigment PBK. So this is a pure pigment. So this is going to be quite dark, it's going to be pretty opaque, and that's why it's not mixing so well. Now if we look at the lamp black from the Winsor Newton Professional range, this is PBK 6 and 7. So now we've got two pigments. So it's not as pure, it's not as dark. So it's not going to mix such muddy colors, but again, it's two black pigments. Now if we look at the neutral tint from the Professional range, this has PB15, PBK6, and PV19. So it's got a little bit of variety of colors there. So this is really a versatile color because it can do so many different mixes and it can mix with so many other colors because it has a few different colors in here. So it's got a little bit of a purple in it, a little bit of a blue in it, some black in it. So it's very versatile. You can really stretch it and pull it either way in the color spectrum, which makes this a very versatile color. And that's why I do recommend it as one of the colors within my palette. However, again, you can still get the same effect using your burnt sienna and your warm blue, but it's a lot easier to just go with the neutral tint, especially if you want to be working on darkening your colors that way, because that's such a quick and easy way. So if this video was valuable to you, I would really appreciate it if you could hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell, because in the next video we're going to be talking all about water control. So we're going to be doing wet and wet, wet and dry, washes. We're going to be doing a flat wash versus a gradient, or what if you want to gradiate two different colors? So what if you want to do a blue to orange sky? We'll cover that as well. So all of that will be covered in the next video. And thank you so much for watching. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye.